So today we are now talking about freedom from pain and regret. So inside of each of us is a capacity for great evil. And we've been going over that, right? The world would tell us that we have it within us to be good. Romans 3, though, verse 10, we've seen this before, but it bears repeating. It is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. There is none who understands. There is none who seeks after God. They have all turned aside, and together they've become unprofitable. There is no one who does good, no, not one. So only when we accept the Bible's diagnosis of our true condition will we accept the remedy. You imagine going to the doctor's office, and the doctor runs tests, and the tests come back that you have cancer, and you just say to the doctor, you know what? I don't believe you. I'm just going to do whatever I want anyway. Well, the fact that you have cancer is one of those things that you have to deal with or you die. And, it's the same thing when it comes to sin. The Bible tells us what our true condition is. The world has a different opinion, and that opinion is wrong. In fact, when we look at the political situation in the world, we can kind of get an idea that politicians really have no clue how to fix the problems of this world, and a big reason for it is because they don't have the right diagnosis of what the problem is. If you don't start with the right diagnosis, you're going to lead to having the wrong treatment. That makes sense? There's Buckley's cough syrup, right? Their title is, It Tastes Awful and It Works. Sometimes when we've got a medicine, we may not like that medicine, just like I mentioned the cancer diagnosis. None of us would want to have that diagnosis for us, but you want to know, wouldn't you, rather than to continue in ignorance? Because to continue in ignorance means that you for sure are going to end up in a worse state than you were before. So we have to admit that we are sick, otherwise we won't accept the medicine that God has for us. Now, what do you think? Is the world getting better or is the world getting worse? Yeah, in general, where we're at today, people are more immoral than they ever have to be. We keep having to pass more and more laws to hold people accountable. There used to be a time in this country where you could leave your car unlocked and wouldn't have to worry about it being ransacked. In fact, even in Sault Ste. Marie, it wasn't that many years ago that you could have done that. But today, if you do that, chances are you're just asking for it. There was a time where you wouldn't have to lock your door because nobody would have gone into your house. Those days are long gone. And there are so many other ways that we have just gotten progressively worse, right? So why is it that only negative news sells, right? It's because we are already bent towards the negative. We certainly have enough negative out there too, right? But that negativity is part of us. It's inbred in us. And when we look at that, we can see evidence of sin. Now, it is true. I won't tell you that in ancient times they weren't really, really bad too, because you could talk about, like I mentioned this morning, the Roman Empire. There were a lot of horrible things that the Roman Empire did. Some of them, like the gladiator shows, right, are not things that we currently do, at least in North America. But at the same time, we also go through cycles. There are times where human beings go through really hard judgments, really hard times, and then that causes people to have a certain waking up. There can be an awakening, and to a certain degree, we can get to a better stage. But I will tell you, as far as I'm concerned, any better stage that has happened at any point in history has been to the degree that mankind has turned to God. One of the things that's very different today, though, than from any other time in history is the fact that we are globally connected in a way that has never happened before, which means that every country in the world, every person in the world is all now moving in sync and having the same values almost, it seems. Now, there is resistance in certain places of the world to American values, but we know, and this isn't a prophecy seminar, but we know from prophecy who's going to win that battle. But the point being is that we have a problem, a major problem. In the 1930s, during the Great Depression, people stood for hours just for a loaf of bread. Do you see that happening today in the United States, if that was the case? Would people who are starving just wait patiently while they had a chance? No. With 450 million handguns, right, and the values that we have today, people are just going to take stuff by force, and there'll be riots, right? I'm a World War II history buff, and one of those scenes that I have read about is the siege of Leningrad. And Leningrad was one of the key cities that Hitler wanted to capture when he invaded the USSR in July of 1941. And when it came to Leningrad, they didn't go into the city. There were some barriers when it came to water and other things like that. So all they did is they just blocked it off. They put a siege on it. That siege lasted 872 days. This is one of the cemeteries in honor of the people who died at Leningrad. During this 872-day siege, over 1.5 million people died of starvation. People ate dogs, cats, and rats to survive, and eventually some resorted to cannibalism. And it was really a gruesome thing. And the thing is when you get into these massive crisis moments, this is where you really see what humanity is made of. In fact, you could say that whenever time you and I go through a hard time, that's when our character will be revealed. Now, we have a choice. We can pay that debt, if you will, up front and do the hard work now to grow and to develop, or we can put it off. But if we put it off, the payment is going to be much greater, and we will find ourselves not having the emotional, spiritual, physical resources to be able to stand firm for God at that time, at that day, when the whole world is going to go after us for our beliefs. Now, God didn't originally create us as evil, right? God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. And then God saw that everything he had made, and indeed it was very good. And this is part also of our understanding of the doctrine of sin, is that this was not something we were created with. We were not meant as human beings to be sinners. We were not meant to be rebellious against the government of God. It is something that we inherited from our first parents, but that was not God's original intent. But once our first parents ate the forbidden fruit, everything changed. Right? Genesis 3:10, it says, I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself. So Adam, before the fall, would look forward to God's presence, would run to God's presence, would spend time with God face to face. After the fall, what is he doing? He's hiding in a bush somewhere with some fig leaves, trying to protect himself from God, because he also knew that, what did God tell him? He said, the day you eat of it, you will surely die. But if you think about it, our natural state as human beings now, because of sin, is to run away from God and run away from the light rather than run to the light. So if any of us are running to the light, it is because of the Spirit of God in us that is working in us to do that. And each of us has inherited this sinful human nature that needs God. Consider a toddler. Are they naturally kind, caring, and thoughtful? Anyone, no, they're not, right? In fact, originally I'd had this as a video, but because of the process that we have there, putting in videos is difficult. The child there is just making a tantrum right there with the parent, right in the public, right? Toddlers have to be taught how to behave. They don't need to be. Have you ever taught a child to misbehave? Do you need to teach a child to misbehave? They just come with that built in, right? And a big part of that is because of that sinful nature that we have. And whenever we look at people in difficult circumstances or people who are doing things that we don't approve of or we don't like, the phrase I always think of is, but for the grace of God, there go I. It's easy to point the finger at people that are going through and making difficult decisions, but given the right circumstances of upbringing and an environment and friends and whatever influences, any of us are capable of anything but for the grace of God. If you ask your average person if they're going to heaven, right, most of them will say yes. Most of them think, yeah, I've generally been a good person. Do you know that even Christians, even some of the average Christians are confused on this subject? That somehow going to heaven is about me doing my best. And that's not what gets me into heaven. It's not about me being a good person, a moral person, me trying to do my best. That's not what gets me into heaven. And if we come with that, if we live our life with that assumption, we're going to be in deep, deep trouble. when the day of judgment comes. You know, some people say, if I'd lived back then, I wouldn't have done it. This is Auschwitz, the entrance to Auschwitz. You know, and so many Germans were involved with that. At one point, the Germans had 44,000 concentration camps, and they had over 2 million people working in those concentration camps. Okay, that's a lot of people that were all complicit in the murdering and slaughtering of over 6 million Jews and over 5 million other minorities, gypsies, and other people. Just a tremendous slaughter, and it was sanctioned by the state. It was brainwashed. People were brainwashed by the state to believe this, and of course the state took advantage of the natural biases and anti-Semitism that had existed in Germany for hundreds of years, and was in fact throughout Europe and even the United States. But what the world saw with Nazism and the result of World War II is where that kind of hate leads. And it's easy for us to say we would act differently. But there's only one way you and I would act differently in those kinds of circumstances, and that is if we are having God living in us and we are walking according to God and according to the Word of God. We must accept the Bible's verdict that we are naturally evil. Because if we don't accept that, if we don't start there, we start on a false foundation, and we will find ourselves in trouble when it comes to our walk with the Lord. We cannot produce goodness from inside of us. Any goodness that you and I have is goodness that God has placed there. By the way, this is the same thing when it comes to the world. Sometimes, in fact, years ago, I had a friend of mine who's a pastor say to me, he's like, Joe, he says, I've got somebody, one of my neighbors is like the nicest guy. I'd give the shirt off his back. I mean, literally, he's so generous with his time, and he's always pleasant. He says, that person, that guy, is so much nicer than most of my church members. And he doesn't believe in God. He's an atheist. He says, why should I go and share the faith with him and bring him into the church? But you see, you forget something if you have that kind of understanding. It's because it's not based on my goodness that gets me into heaven. You could be a really nice guy as far as the world is concerned, but if you don't have Jesus, you will be lost. A lot of people have trouble with this, especially people who don't know the Bible. They say, why should I be judged for, the same way as somebody who, let's say, is a Hitler, some kind of maniac, some kind of serial killer? Why should I be judged the same way? But what we forget is that because we are children of Adam and Eve, God owes us nothing. God doesn't owe you and I anything. The reason God saves us is because He loves us. He doesn't owe us salvation. What He owes us is justice, and that justice would be death. But fortunately, because God loved us, He sent us His Son, and Jesus Christ opened the way for us to be able to get salvation and grace and mercy. All true goodness comes from God, and I am a firm believer that even when you see an atheist who's being kind, it's because of God. When you see kindness in general society, it's because of God. If you think about this, it'll make sense to you. What would happen to this world if God just withdrew His Holy Spirit? All hell would break loose in all of us. The point is that we owe whatever safety, whatever peace, whatever goodness that is in this world, we owe it to God. And even if most human beings would not acknowledge God, do you remember how we read Romans chapter 1 and they didn't acknowledge God? Right? Well, even if those people won't acknowledge God, that doesn't mean that it is not the goodness of God that operates. In fact, I could bring you texts, and it's not really the focus of this message, but I could bring you texts. One of them is Colossians 1, where it says that all things hold together by the Son. Right? Literally, our very breath, the atoms that we have, everything in this world literally holds together because of God Himself. Now, Adam and Eve lost Eden for eating fruit. And I keep bringing this up because this is a minor infraction in this world. Right? It's like your parents saying to you, don't eat the food in the cookie jar, and the child eats from the cookie jar. The parent goes and gets a gun and executes the child. You'd be like, that's pretty excessive, right? Or the child eats takes from the cookie jar and the parent disowns the child. That's it. Child services for you. I'm done. Right? We would look at that and say, like, the punishment doesn't fit the crime. It's way overboard. And yet, the reason we would say this about the fruit, Adam and Eve eating the fruit, is because we have often had a hard time. We struggle as human beings because we're saturated in sin to understand how utterly and completely sinful and horrible it is. But if we think about this, sin ultimately leads to the murder of God. Because you have to get rid of God if you're going to have lawlessness. Then you can understand why sin has to be dealt with severe punishment, right? But as I mentioned last night, actually, I think it was, when we are, if God had just wiped out Satan at the first hint of sin, then the inhabitants of the worlds and the angels would have just absolutely thought God had gone off his rocker. Why? Because they didn't understand what sin really was. And so there's only one way God knew that he could make sure that everyone would understand how horrible, how awful, how evil sin was. In that way is to allow it to run its course. Until you get to the end of it, and you are then, all the universe will have no more stomach for sin, because we will all know exactly where it goes, and it goes nowhere good. And that's why God allows this to happen, because one day soon, when we get to heaven, he's going to be able, we are going to have been inoculated from sin, and never ever will anyone want to choose sin again. And anybody who has a question about what sin is like, they'll come up to us and they'll ask us as the redeemed, what was it like to be on earth? And then we might say something like, let me describe what hell is. And we would describe our life here on earth, because hell's not some hot spot somewhere in some kind of spiritual realm. We are living in hell right now in this world. Hell is anywhere where God is not in full control. Now, a key principle for us is that Jesus adopted us as his children before he even created the earth, which is why Adam and Eve did not drop dead immediately as they ate the fruit. They were right from that moment subject to the mercy of God based on the sacrifice of Jesus. And every human being who has ever lived owes their existence, owes their life to the sacrifice of Jesus. If it wasn't for Jesus' willingness to come to this earth and to die for us and to step in for us, none of us would have existed, because the earth would have been destroyed right there. Humanity would have been destroyed and it would have been game over. But we fortunately serve a Savior who loves us. We saw last night, John 3:16, right? For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him would not perish but have everlasting life. Ephesians 1 also tells us about how Jesus adopted us. It says, blessed be the Father, blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who has blessed us with every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places in Christ, just as he chose us in him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and without blame before him in love. Notice here it says, before the foundation of the world, he chose us. Before the foundation of the world, God knew that Adam and Eve would sin. God knew that all of us would exist, and he chose us. Now, some people say, well, how could God know that sin was going to exist and yet create the devil and then allow all this mess to happen? Well, this is because when we have freedom of choice, when we have free will, sin was always going to at some point have to exist until people learned what evil was and it could be eradicated. And this is why God went through this great experiment to allow sin to run its course such that the universe would recognize what it really means to disconnect themselves from God and would never want to do that again. And so God understood that he'd only have maybe, a few thousand years that he'd have to work through that kind of horrible, awful mess. And after that, never again would he ever have to worry about sin coming up. And so God decided to take the Buckleys, if you will, for God-sized Buckleys, to take the medicine of allowing sin to have its existence, because otherwise, what would God have to do? He'd have to always be I'm not creating him, not creating her, not creating him, not creating her. And so then God's not really working on a on a basis of free love. He's working on a basis of manipulation. And it would not be love, and God could not do that because God is love. It would go against his very character. And I mentioned this last night, but it bears repeating. And that is that the one being in all the universe who has suffered more because of sin, and it is not even close, is God himself. Because not only did Jesus come to die for us, but God sees and feels and is present for every act of sin. Every rape, every murder, every horrible thing that human beings are capable of. God sees it. And for most of those things, he has to choose not to intervene. Because to intervene would mean he has to stop here, he has to intervene here. So he's got to stop this person, which now that person did what they did because of what happened over here. So I've got to stop this. And then now, well, I have got to stop this, and I've got to stop that. And next thing you know, where do we end up? Back to Lucifer, who turns into Satan. But the beauty of the will of God and the grace of God is that he takes all of the horribleness and somehow he weaves his will through all of it so that at the end, his will have been done. And he will accomplish what he set out to accomplish, which is to save you and I. So yes, it's horrible that there is suffering and pain in this world. It's horrible that there is evil in this world. But if that was the end of the story, that would be completely and totally tragic and hopeless. And we would have to go into the world and just live our life however we want, because today, eat and live, for tomorrow we die, right? But instead, God has this process in place so that at one point soon, sin will no longer exist anymore. And you and I, through the power of the salvation that is offered us through Jesus Christ, will one day be free from sin. And one day we will not ever have to face sin again. And we will be able to get this glorious existence with God where we will never have to lock our doors again. We will never be in fear again. There will never be any violence again. And there will never be a CNN again or anything like it, because there won't be anything negative to report. If there is going to be a news service, it's always going to be positive. Amen? Now, Adam and Eve were saved by Jesus' future sacrifice, and every one of us deserves death, right? Ezekiel 18:20 says, the soul who sins shall die, right? And the wages of sin is death, is Romans 6:23. And for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And so no amount of good behavior can save us. Our works have a place, but only in the way that we allow God to have his way. When Jesus is in me and he does the work within me, then that work is pleasing to God. But if I do the good work and Jesus isn't doing it in me, it's not pleasing to God. And this is the thing I think a lot of times we don't understand as Christians. We can go to church, we can sing songs, we can even give our tithe, we can do all kinds of good things, right? We can do all the right things. But if we're doing them through our own steam, through our own strength, these things do not please God. Did you hear me? They don't please God. Why? Because they're tainted, saturated with sin. Every one of us has sinful motives. And that's not what pleases God. What pleases God is his Son. And what pleases God is his Son working in us and through us. You know how Jesus, what did Jesus say when he was on earth? He said, everything I do is what I see my Father doing. Everything I say is what my Father told me to say, right? The very relationship Jesus demonstrates is the relationship he intends for you and I to have, which is everything I see Jesus do, that is what I do. All the words that Jesus gives me, that's the words that I speak. I do nothing of my own, as he said. That's what he came to demonstrate. Sometimes people get confused about Jesus, and they will think that what Jesus was saying is that he's not God. No, Jesus as a man was 100% dependent on his Father because he needed that as a man, just like you and I need that as human beings. We have no hope of living a righteous life on our own. It's not about reading the instruction manual and then just going out there and doing it. It doesn't work that way. If we try to do it, we will always fail. We all deserve to die because we all were born sinners, and sin is lawlessness, rebellion against government. And when you rebel against the government, that is called treason. And treason, even in earthly governments, is always punishable by either life imprisonment or in times past was execution. And in God's government, it's execution, it's death. There comes a day where everyone in the world who does not submit themselves to the government of God will pay with their life. Now, a lot of people are upset about that. A lot of people get angry about that. And a lot of people want to dismiss Christianity and God because they say that's not fair. But it's not about fairness. It's about reality. And this is a big problem. You remember when we talked about the Word of God and following the Word of God, the problem with a lot of the world is that they're not living in reality. They're living in a make-believe reality that they've concocted themselves as they've come together in groups, whether it's universities that have come together or scientists that have come together, and they come up with these ideas of how the world should be. And so they just determine together the sky is purple, and now everybody believes the sky is purple. That doesn't change the fact that the sky is blue. So the world can say all they want. God doesn't exist. God never existed. This is all chance. They can say it all they want. But it doesn't change the fact that God is real. And that one day they will have to face God in the judgment. There is no utopic future for humanity apart from God. Star Trek, right, talks, Gene Roddenberry had this whole world that he built and this idea that World War III happened, a few of mankind survived it. And then they realized that the way they were doing capitalism and everything else like that wasn't working. And they got to the place where they didn't need money anymore and everybody loved each other and all worked together. The one thing that was always interesting to me about Star Trek, though, anyway, is that they still had wars. They still had all kinds of other intrigue. And so this utopic future just never worked, and it wouldn't work. There's no way, left to ourselves, that mankind is going to improve. It is only going to get worse. We can't solve our problems. If we could have solved our problems, we would have. We're not going to solve our problems, and we need outside help. We have all inherited Adam's bent for sin. Romans 5:12 says, "Therefore, just as through one man sin entered into the world, and death through sin, and so death spread to all mankind because all sinned." All right? This is both true from the perspective that every one of us are born sinners. It's also true from the fact that every one of us cannot but sin because we are children of Adam. A leopard can't change its spots. A wolf can't change its nature. It's not possible. The world would have you believe that children are born innocent, but the Bible says otherwise. Children are not born innocent. Every one of us is born a sinner from birth. Now, it is true that we all have, God has preserved for each of us the freedom of choice, and we can make choices to be saved, but that's because of what God has done, not because of what I'm doing. Not because of what I have naturally, but because of what Jesus has done. The only way to heaven is through Jesus. And this was true, by the way, in Adam's day. It was true in Abraham's day, in Moses' day, in David's day, and it's true today. The only way to heaven is through Jesus. Now, there will be millions of people in heaven who never heard the name of Jesus because most of them is because they lived before Jesus. But that doesn't mean that it won't be because of Jesus that they are there. John 14:6, Jesus said this, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Why is that? It's because we didn't have any hope. There was no reason why God should save us because we were condemned. I will get into it in my third presentation tonight, a little bit more of how God does that. Inside of each of us is sin and ugliness. I have this garbage heap to just say that's what we are inside. That's what we are without Christ. This is what we are. There's nothing good in us. If we saw ourselves in the light and purity of God, we would be in complete horror of our true condition. How many of you remember in April of 2010 how Deepwater Horizon exploded and sank? And as a result, it caused an oil well underground to just spew for, I think it was 87 days. 11 people lost their life in that explosion. And then for like 87 days until July, they had to work to try, July 15th, I believe, they had to work to get this thing capped. And during that period of 87 days, over 4 million gallons of oil spilled into the Gulf of Mexico. And sin is like that oil in our life. It's spilling, it's contaminating, it's polluting, and we can't stop it. Right? This is like sin, right? The old style, they would drill and then it would go and shoot off. Right? The point is that the impurities in our life are not things that you and I, can clear up. We need outside help. Only God can cap the well of sin in us. And inside each of us is a raging beast. John 8:34 says, Jesus answered them, most assuredly I say to you, whoever commits sin is a slave of sin. Here's another irony. A lot of people in the world say, I wouldn't want to choose Christ and become a Christian because I wouldn't want my freedom restricted. Right? I want to do what I want to do, where I want to go, when I want to get up, and where I want to, if I want to eat something, I'm going to eat something. If I want to party, I'm going to party. If I want to drink, I want to drink. If I'm going to go here, I'm going to go there. That's freedom. But are they free? No, because that's the bait, if you will, of Satan, right? He gives us this illusion of freedom until he has us in the trap of addiction, and then we find ourselves unable to get away. Reality is that sin is slavery. The Bible describes following Jesus as slavery as well. The difference, though, is that with Jesus, it was voluntary slavery. You have to understand a bit of biblical times to understand why slavery would be used. Because today, slavery is, of course, universally condemned as being evil. But back in the day, you had all classes of people that could not have any status on their own. And so you wanted to find yourself a good master, and a good master would take care of you and watch over you and protect you. It was a bad master you wanted to avoid. Now, you didn't always have the ability to avoid a bad master, which is part of the reason why slavery is not something that we would want to do today, because of the fact that human beings are horrible, all right? And so, anyhow, God is a benevolent master, and God is a kind master. And so, we each have a choice to make. The other thing about God is you can leave him anytime, right? You've never heard of someone being addicted to reading the Bible. You've never heard of anyone being addicted to praying, right? It doesn't happen. Why? Because God doesn't force us to follow him. Only Satan does that. So we have a choice. A lot of people say, well, I choose neither. I'm my own person. No, you're not. Because the only way you and I can say no to sin is through the power of God in us. The only way the power of God can work in us is if we will submit ourselves fully to him and allow him to be our master. So either we are the master, our God is our master, or sin is our master. There is no in between. It's only an either or. The well of our heart is completely polluted. We need a filtering system, if you will, to use that analogy. God is that filter, and he can transform us. Right? Romans 1:29-31, it's one of these lists of the flesh, sins of the flesh. He says, being filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, evil-mindedness. They're whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, violent, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, undiscerning, untrustworthy, unloving, unforgiving, unmerciful. And this is just the church members. This is all of us without Christ. This is all of us when we don't allow God to have his way in us. This is the pollution that comes out of our natural flesh. Now, Jesus described the Pharisees as being whitewashed tombs, right? Beautiful on the outside, but inside full of dead men's bones, right? Or you could say beautiful on the outside and inside being a garbage dump. This is the thing for us, is that each of us can't purify what's on the inside. We can put on a good show for a period of time when we need to, but God knows our true condition, and we will be judged by our true condition. And we will be judged by not just all of our actions, but all of our thoughts. And when we realize that we're judged by our actions and our thoughts, who here has any hope of standing righteously before God? No one is the answer. key principle: only God can cleanse the polluted well of our life. We need supernatural help. We need God's help. And this is the point of what the Bible teaches us and what we learn through the Gospels, what we learn through Jesus Christ, through his life, as well as what we learn through the writings of Paul, is that only God and surrendering to God and allowing to God do his work is going to give us the ability to live righteously before him. But if we don't understand these foundational principles, we are going to keep trying to do our best, and we're going to keep failing. Which is why the church is often filled with people who have been church members for sometimes their whole life, sometimes decades and decades, and yet they're the same miserable, mad, or sad Adventists that they were when they started. Why? Because they haven't allowed God to have full control. And they haven't understood how it's not about what they do, it's about what God does in them. Now, I often describe sin as having a zombie inside of you, or a sinful nature. It's this whole idea that sin wants to keep coming down. We put it down and it keeps coming back up, right? Like a zombie, like, right? He keeps coming back up, or we keep him in the shed sometimes. Sometimes we might even do like, I don't know if you guys remember, ever saw that cartoon? There was a cartoon as a kid. The cat came back the very next day. The cat came back. So this cat was just destroying this man's house, and he kept trying to get rid of the cat. And he went into the forest, and it came back, and he went here, and it came back, and he kept coming back, and kept coming back. And he went out into the water, tried to put it in a sack and drown it. And by the time he came back, the cat was back at the house. Nothing he could do to get rid of the cat until it was the guy himself who ended up killing himself trying to get rid of the cat, right? And it's kind of, in a way, this is how it is with our sinful nature, right? We try everything to get rid of our sinful nature. And that's why some people go even to the extremes of being a monk, an ascetic, right? Going out into the wilderness. If I could just get rid of everything and any distraction, then I would be okay. Some people have gone to extremes of castrating themselves. Other people have gone to other extremes when it comes to not eating foods, only making careful at certain things that they do, all hoping that that is what's going to give them the power to stay away from sin. And all of it misses the mark. And it's not God's will. God doesn't want us to separate us from the world, because how would we reach the world? And we don't need to, because what we can't do on ourselves, God can do. Which is, by the way, the message of Galatians when it came to some of the believers who had a Jewish background. The Gentiles were coming in, and they were saying to the Gentiles, you guys have to be circumcised in order to be right with God. But the disciples, through stories like Cornelius, which you can find in Acts, I believe it's chapter 9, you can find places like that where Cornelius and the group, they in fact got the Holy Spirit come upon them and fill them while they were completely almost pagan. Literally 2 hours before, they're bowing down to Peter, thinking he's a god. And then 2 hours later, the Holy Spirit's coming down on them. And then Peter and the group says, well, what's stopping us from baptizing them? Because the fact that they received the Holy Spirit is proof of the fact that God accepted them. And so they baptized them. The point isn't how much head knowledge I have, how much willpower I have, how strict I am for what comes through my mouth. What matters is that I've surrendered myself completely to God and allowed him to have his way. There was an old preacher, some of you would know him as old Adventist Morris Venden, who had preached a sermon on the grace and mercy of God. And he was met at the door at the back by an old lady, little old lady. She said to him, Pastor, you have to be a vegetarian in order to be saved. To which he replied, Jesus wasn't a vegetarian. And to which she replied, that's because he didn't have all the light. You see, the thing is a lot of us were searching for specialized knowledge, and we think if we have just the right knowledge and the right understanding, because we as a Seventh-day Adventist church have Ellen White as an example, the spirit of prophecy, that means that we are more exalted position than everybody else. But the only thing I will tell you is that we will be judged more severely for the light that we have. But even when it comes to Ellen White, you could have all of Ellen White memorized, and you could still crucify Jesus. The people that crucified Jesus had the entire Old Testament memorized. They were the leaders, the religious leaders of Israel, and they murdered God. And by the way, they were Sabbath keepers. So even keeping the Sabbath, we can't go and, strut ourselves and say, we're Seventh-day Adventists, we keep the Sabbath unlike anybody else, because it is Sabbath keepers that murdered God. We can't make our confidence based on our knowledge, based on the membership of our church. The only way we can place our confidence is in Jesus Christ. Any other foundation is a false one. God never intended for us to live a life without religious power. Romans chapter 6, likewise you also reckon yourselves to be dead indeed to sin, but alive to God in Christ Jesus our Lord. Therefore do not let sin reign in your mortal body, that you should obey it in its lust, and do not present your members as instruments of righteousness, which, by the way, this text makes it quite clear. We have a choice. God's the one who restores our choice, but we choose how we spend our time, how we spend our money, how we spend our focus, right? And then he continues, he says, but present yourselves to God as being alive from the dead, and your members as instruments of righteousness. For sin shall not have dominion over you, if you are not under law, but under grace. And this, my friends, is an amazing promise for us. Are you under a grip of some kind of addiction? Something in your life that is negative, that has grabbed a hold of you? That verse is your freedom. For you will not have dominion. Sin shall not have dominion over you. Where before Jesus, you and I could never say no to sin, and we were in the grip of sin. After Jesus, we can have victory. Now, some of you might be Christians and are under the grip of some kind of addiction. You can't get free. Then I would suggest to you the reason you can't get free is because you are double-minded. And it's important for us to decide to follow God fully. If we will follow God fully, God will give us the strength and the victory. But if we are double-minded, then God can't give us that victory, because if he gave us the victory, he would encourage us in our sin. But God is powerful and God is good. Amen? So are you ready to let go of your old life? Are you ready to follow God? Are you ready to trust him with everything? For many of you here, you've been Christians your whole lives. You've been Christians a long time. But, are you as close to God as you want? Do you have the relationship with God that you want? Do you feel the regular presence of God and the blessing of God? Are you at peace? Do you have joy? Or are you gripped by anxieties and worries and cares and angers and dissensions and the works of the flesh? That's not the state God wants you to stay in. He wants to give you that peace. And so I pray that you would choose Jesus